Nathaniel Ogunniyi is here, the political commentator, to go through the papers with me. Nathaniel, good morning.
Good morning, Rosie.
Can you imagine? We've had stories in the past of people leaving sensitive documents on the train. It's not a good idea.
No, and I think this is probably quite embarrassing. The sort of relatively junior person who did this, I think, will probably keep their job, but probably won't live it down for a while.
Yes, I'm sure, and it definitely was not sort of Secret Service material or government information. Thank goodness, as has happened in the past. Shall we talk about the commemorations yesterday? There is a wonderful piece in the Times just talking about the events as they unfolded yesterday. One of those, what always feels like a really iconic photograph now, where you've got Keir Starmer and Kemi Badenoch holding the wreaths. Behind them, a whole row of prime ministers stood there to pay their respects. And the Times has put it as Kate steps up to support the King at a tribute to the nation's war dead. What do you make of the coverage?
Yeah, so I suppose there are a record number of former prime ministers there. Now, of course, you have Rishi Sunak, Liz Truss, and all the prime ministers that came before them. It's a record number. I think I saw somebody tweet that if Liz Truss lives to 96, she'll have spent longer at the Cenotaph than she did in Downing Street. But when you look at the seriousness of the event, I think it was Kemi Badenoch's first big outing, and I think she handled it relatively well. You see the Prime Minister, I think, looking respectful. You saw the Princess of Wales looking on from the balcony. I think it was a fine moment in British tradition. And I think it's right that we continue to honour the people who have paid so great a price for us.
Yeah, the Times says there was a record-breaking number of former prime ministers in attendance, 8. They take up almost an entire row of their own. There's some brilliant analysis and commentary on sort of what that day means inside the Times this morning, which I recommend. Let's look at the front page of the Telegraph that says, Starmer plots to thwart Trump on Ukraine. How so?
So I think the idea here is that Starmer will work together with European leaders to persuade both Biden to give Ukraine permission to fire Storm Shadow missiles deep into Russian territory, which Biden has so far refused to give permission to. There's also the idea that the US will increase their financial aid to Ukraine before Donald Trump comes in. I think the idea there is that Donald Trump has expressed a keenness to end the war that the last Democrat administration haven't really had. And there's a fear that that may lead to pressure on Ukraine to accept loss of territory rather than trying to regain all the territory they had before the war started.
Yeah, I wonder how confident you feel about our defence spending plans, which come under, as we've just been talking about with Terry, significant scrutiny in the wake of Trump's re-election.
Yeah, so there's lots of talk about 2.5% or 3%, how the UK can raise our defence spending. I think a lot of Trump's European and Trump's NATO policy is geared around the fact that he feels the US is being taken advantage of. He sees the massive defence spending in the US and how that's not necessarily matched by everyone in the EU or in NATO. And so that unfairness, I think, is something that Starmer is keen to avoid the UK being painted as part of. Of course, I think defence spending in the UK has long been above the 2% pledge that NATO members have. And I think Starmer will be keen to highlight that in his next meeting with Trump. Yeah,
you wonder how that meeting's going to go. Donald Trump talked about, we mentioned this on the programme last week, saying he would end the Ukraine war on day one. And obviously that's made people, particularly Zelensky, but obviously other NATO members, that he's going to force Ukraine to accept land lost to Russia. Do you feel sort of confident that Keir Starmer actually is someone who holds clout and weight with Donald Trump when he makes decisions like this?
So I think the Foreign Service has done an excellent job in getting both Starmer and David Lammy in front of Donald Trump before he was elected. I look at the efforts by our diplomatic service. I think there's a Dame Karen Pierce out in the US who's been doing great work in promoting British interests. I think it was a major coup that she got the Starmer in front of Trump before he was elected, and it was said that they had a warm meeting. I think that relationship was somewhat damaged by Labour sending out volunteers during the US election campaign, which of course the Trump campaign actually took to court, claiming it was foreign interference and therefore illegal. But I think it's an uphill battle for Starmer, but certainly not one that he's aware of. So it's certainly one he is aware of.
Yeah, definitely. Well, the other one is on the climate, and that is something that we know what Donald Trump thinks in terms of, he said, drill, baby, drill. I'm looking at inside the Times this morning. Keir Starmer sends a signal on climate goals. It says he's going to insist this week, the Prime Minister, that it's in Britain's strategic self-interest to push ahead with rapidly decarbonising the economy, even if Donald Trump's election stalls coordinated action to tackle climate change. Do you think the climate is high on Keir Starmer's agenda?
Yes, I think it certainly is. You look at the plans that Labour did before they came into government, and climate was certainly up there. You look at Ed Miliband as the Environment Secretary, as the Energy Secretary, and you see the impact that he's had, particularly when we talk about things like taxation in the North Sea. I think that's one area where Labour have really shown their teeth. When it comes to sustainable finance, which I think is the focus of these COP29 talks in Azerbaijan, I think there are two parts really to it. There's about getting private finance into the green transition, and that's about, funding for wind farms and battery plants and electric vehicles and things like that, which Labour have signalled as a big domestic priority here. And then there's a second point, right? There's a second point about working closely with developing countries and ensuring that they get the funding that they need. I think the figure that people keep talking about is 1 trillion, which I think is a significant increase on our current level, which is about 100 billion.
Yeah. This does also get more difficult with a Trump presidency. He's called the science behind climate change a hoax. We're going to be live in Azerbaijan, actually, in about 10 minutes' time to work out exactly what's on the agenda and what we think that summit will be able to achieve. Could we learn anything from Australia? I'm sure, well, maybe from its health service we could. Nathaniel, what about its social media policy?
So I think the idea here is that Australia are banning social media for under 16s. I'm not sure there is much we can learn from them on this front. I think last year we had the Online Safety Act and bits of that coming into force. This is about protecting young people when they go online. But I think while policies like this might sound good, they don't necessarily deliver for young people. I think we need to support young people in accessing social media and the internet safely. It's not so much, I think, about trying to ban them or preventing them from accessing it, because of course at some point they will have to deal with the real world. And so it's important that they learn to deal with that, whether that's through support at home with their parents or in school through their teachers. I think we have to give them the skills to cope in a changing world.
But there's also policy that can change the world as well. I mean, in Australia, say they've banned under 16s from sites like Facebook, Instagram, X, TikTok, and the health secretary's been quite supportive of it. Is there an argument, actually, Nathaniel, that these social media companies have had too much influence? They've created highly addictive products that are having catastrophic impacts on our young people's mental well-being.
No, so young people's mental health is very important, and I think schools and parents should be doing as much as they can to support that. But what we see in bans in a lot of areas is that they just don't work, right? People look back at prohibition and bans on the consumption of alcohol many years ago, and we know those didn't work. We know that people still got around them. I think the case would probably be pretty similar for social media.
Yeah. I mean, would you be supportive then? It sounds like no, not a supportive of a ban for under 16-year-olds. Do we want under 16-year-olds spending, endless time doom scrolling on TikTok?
So I suppose, do we want them spending all their time doing it? No, probably not, right? I think there's
how much time?
Oh gosh, I can't tell you how many hours in a day they can do. But I think if you manage to get all your other things in life done, if you manage to get your homework done, if you manage to see your friends, if you're out playing sport. I grew up playing a lot of rugby, I still do. But if you manage to have a life outside of this, then there's no harm in a little TikTok scroll. I must say I'm partial to a bit of that. And I think it's a way for people to stay connected. I have family in Nigeria who sort of like look at my Instagram, and every so often will send me a message and say, I saw you were doing this. And equally for young people who've moved from one part of the country to another, or indeed from one country to another, right? I think it's a great way of staying in touch.
Yeah. And making new friends as well. When I moved to France, I made a lot of friends through an expats in Lyon Facebook page, and actually ended up starting a choir from a Facebook page. So there are some real world repercussions, definitely. Talking of screen time, Going to the cinema, I went to see Paddington yesterday, which was actually completely charming and I really enjoyed the cinema experience because it's not something I do very often. But films are getting less cinema time in the Times today. Cinemas will now on average screen a film for 2.9 weeks, down from 4.6. So Nathaniel, if there's something you want to go and see, you've got to see it sharpish.
Yeah, I know. So it looks like this trend started really before the pandemic. It looks like it started back in 2015 or 16, where the average time dropped. But then on the other hand, you have a trend for the biggest films that are in there for longer. So I think there's Barbie and there's Oppenheimer, and they were in there for 16, 17 weeks each. So it really depends on what you're trying to see. I suppose there is an argument that more people are spending time streaming online, but I think there's a great enjoyment in going to the cinema in person. You can have dinner or lunch beforehand, but I think it's great to get people out of their homes and into real life.
Yeah, Anne Hathaway was in this new program called Mother's Instinct. That was only in the cinema for 2 weeks. By the time it sort of entered into my consciousness that it's something worth going seeing, I think I would have missed that one.
Yeah, and I probably would have been in the same category, right? I think it is important that you get a good turnover of films in the cinema because, of course, if a cinema only shows one thing for the entire year, then you might get a bit bored. But if it's not there for long enough, then it never really gets into the memory.
What would have been entertaining? I'm looking in the Telegraph now. I've got one item of Le Creuset, but I would certainly like some more. I'm not sure I would have gone to their warehouse in Aldershot to queue for as long as some of the people did. Tell us what happened over the weekend.
So the story here is that some people queued for up to 4 hours for pots and pans, which I really find incredible. I think Le Creuset sort of has a middle class status symbol, which drives a lot of people to go and do things like this in order to get their cookware. I think many other brands were sort of jealous of the recognition that they have. I think particularly when people have friends or family over, when they're hosting, it's sort of seen as a bit of a thing if you have a Le Creuset pot or pan. But I just think, gosh, I can cook with whatever they sell at the local John Lewis. I think I'll be all right.
Well, there's 4-hour queue for this huge Le Creuset warehouse, basically discount deal. If you were going to spend £600 on a very large casserole dish, I think you would want it 50% off.
Well, that's true. You look at the offers on sale, and I think those are quite attractive. But I think it's more than about just the product itself. I think for lots of people, it's about the lifestyle. It's about buying into this sort of idea that comes along with the pots and pans, not necessarily the fact that they cook any better than what's on sale at
also, I think they last a lifetime as well, and then you could pass them down. I enjoyed the headline: "Pandemonium descends on the Le Creuset sale." Apparently, the police got called. I don't think there was sort of like a row, but the queue was miles long, so it needed some manning. Nathaniel, thank you so much. Nathaniel Ogunniyi, the political commentator, going through the papers with me this morning. Anything from Trump tariffs to the price of Le Creuset and how long you'd queue for a discounted one.